The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I was staring at my phone, watching the seconds tick by as I lay awake, calculating and recalculating how I was going to make my spring semester tuition payment in 6 days. The number glowing back at me from my banking app hadn't changed in the 3 hours since I'd last checked, 847.23, not even close to the 18, zero I needed. Sweetheart? Dad's voice was thick with something I couldn't quite place the alcohol, maybe, or that particular brand of desperation that came with making very bad decisions in very dark places. I need to tell you something. Even now, 2 years later, sitting in the executive conference room of Meadowbrook Racetrack with its mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the track where my father once lost everything, I can hear the exact inflection in his voice, the way he said, "sweetheart," like it was supposed to cushion the blow, like that one word could somehow make what came next hurt less. "Your tuition money," he continued, and my stomach dropped into freefall before he even finished the sentence. There was this sure thing, baby girl. Triple Crown bloodlines, perfect track conditions, and the odds were just, it was a guaranteed win. I remember the crystalline clarity that settled over me in that moment, sharp and cold as winter air. Not shock somehow. I wasn't shocked at all. Maybe that should have surprised me more than it did. But after 21 years of being my father's daughter, after 2 decades of watching him chase one sure thing after another, I felt only the sickening thud of inevitability. "How much?" I asked, though I already knew. "All of it," he whispered. "But listen, the horse just had bad luck. The jockey pulled up in the final stretch because of some bullshit about the horse favoring his left leg. It was sabotage, I'm telling you. The whole thing was rigged." I hung up without saying another word. The thing about growing up as Martin Walsh's daughter is that you learn early how to read the signs. By the time I was 8, I could tell the difference between a good week and a bad week just by the sound of his key in the lock. Good weeks meant he'd whistle tunelessly as he kicked off his work boots. Bad weeks meant the door would slam and he'd go straight to the kitchen without speaking to anyone. My mother tried to shield me from it in those early years. She'd invented elaborate explanations for why Daddy couldn't come to my school play. "He's working extra shifts to save for your college fund, honey," or why we suddenly had to move apartments in the middle of the night. "Wouldn't it be fun to live somewhere new?" She was gifted at creative storytelling, my mother, though I didn't recognize it as fiction until much later. The first time I truly understood what gambling addiction looked like was when I was 12. Dad had been particularly excited that week bouncing around the house, making grand pronouncements about our family's imminent financial security. He'd found a system, he explained to anyone who'd listen, a foolproof method for picking winners based on some complex algorithm involving bloodlines, track conditions, and jockey statistics. "This is it, Linda," I heard him tell my mother through their bedroom wall that night. "This is the one that's going to change everything for us. We'll be able to buy Sarah that piano she wants, maybe even look at houses in the good school district." I had wanted that piano with the desperate intensity that only 12-year-olds can muster. I'd been teaching myself to play on the old electronic keyboard Mom had found at a garage sale, but I dreamed of real keys, of pedals that actually worked, of making music that didn't sound tinny and hollow. Dad took our entire savings account, $300-400, that my mother had accumulated through years of clipping coupons and working overtime at the diner and bet it on a horse named Midnight's Promise. I still remember the name because I looked it up later, wanting to see what $300-400 worth of hope looked like. The horse finished dead last, and afterwards, when I asked Dad about it, he just shrugged and said, "That's gambling, kiddo. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose." But that wasn't true, was it? Because Dad never won. Not really. Oh, he'd have occasional small victories that would send him into euphoric spirals of optimism and planning, but those wins always went right back into the next sure thing. The house always won in the end, and my family was always the house's favorite customer. High school brought a different kind of normal. By then, Mom had stopped making excuses and started making ultimatums. The fights were epic and routine screaming matches that would escalate until one of them stormed out, leaving me to sit in the aftermath wondering if this would be the time she finally followed through on her threats to leave. "Your daughter needs stability, Martin," she'd shout, as if I weren't sitting right there at the kitchen table pretending to do homework. "She needs to know that when we promise her something, we can follow through. She needs to know her college fund isn't going to disappear the next time you get a hot tip from some drunk at the track. I'm not some degenerate loser, he'd shout back. I'm an investor. I'm building something for this family. You think I want to work construction for the rest of my life? You think I want Sarah to struggle like we have? The irony was breathtaking, really. He was gambling away my future in the name of securing my future, destroying our family's stability in pursuit of stability. But pointing out logical inconsistencies to a gambling addict is like trying to explain color to someone who's never had sight. The concepts simply don't translate. I learned to become financially independent early out of pure necessity. At 14, I was babysitting for neighbors and dog walking for anyone who'd pay me. At 16, I had a part-time job at the local grocery store, carefully hiding my earnings in a savings account Dad didn't know existed. I learned to forge his signature on school forms because half the time he'd either forgotten about parent-teacher conferences or was too embarrassed about our financial situation to show up. College was my escape plan, my chance to build a life that didn't revolve around whether Dad had a good week or a bad week. I'd researched schools obsessively, applied for every scholarship I could find, worked 2 jobs my senior year to save every penny possible. When I got accepted to state with a partial academic scholarship, I felt like I was finally going to break free from the cycle that had defined my entire childhood. Mom was proud but worried. Are you sure you can handle the financial burden, sweetheart? Maybe community college first, just to be safe? But I was determined. I'd calculated everything down to the dollar. Scholarship covered 60%, student loans covered 25%, and my savings plus a campus work-study job would cover the rest. It was tight, but it was doable. For the first time in my life, I had a plan that didn't depend on my father's self-control. I should have known better. The pattern was so predictable, I could have set my watch by it. Dad would go weeks, sometimes even months, staying clean. He'd attend his Gamblers Anonymous meetings religiously, talk about accountability and making amends, help Mom with groceries and household expenses like a normal father and husband. During these periods, he'd become almost aggressively normal, volunteering to drive me to work, asking about my classes, making elaborate plans for family vacations we'd never take. I'm a different man now, Sarah, he told me during one of these good phases, maybe 6 months before the tuition incident. I know I've made mistakes, but I've learned from them. Your mother and I, we're talking about renewing our vows, maybe taking that trip to Ireland she's always wanted. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him, because underneath all the disappointment and resentment, he was still my father. I still remembered him teaching me to ride a bike, still remembered the way he'd carry me on his shoulders when I was small, still remembered how he'd tell me bedtime stories about brave princesses who saved themselves. But the relapses always came, always. Some trigger would set him off: a bad day at work, an argument with Mom, or sometimes nothing at all except the inexorable pull of addiction, and he'd disappear for hours, sometimes days. He'd come home with that particular look of shame and defiance mixed together, and we'd all pretend not to notice the missing money or the new credit card bills. The tuition money had been sitting in a special savings account for 8 months. Dad had insisted on being the one to manage it, claimed it was his responsibility as my father to handle my educational expenses. "Trust me, sweetheart," he'd said. "This is the one thing I won't screw up. Your education is sacred." I should have moved the money myself. I knew better, had known better for years, but some naive part of me still wanted to believe that my education really was sacred to him, that there were some lines even addiction wouldn't let him cross. I was an idiot. The week after Dad gambled away my tuition, I did something I'd never done before. I stopped trying to fix things. I didn't call financial aid to beg for emergency assistance. I didn't look into additional student loans or payment plans. I didn't even tell my academic advisor what had happened. Instead, I withdrew from my spring semester classes and moved back home, watching my carefully constructed escape plan crumble into dust. Mom was devastated. "We'll figure something out, baby," she kept saying, though we both knew there was nothing to figure out. "Maybe you can take a semester off, work full-time, save up enough to go back in the fall." But I was done with maybes, done with hoping Dad would change, done with building plans around someone else's addiction, done with letting his problems dictate the trajectory of my life. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom with its faded pink walls and participation trophy collection, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to destroy him. Not physically, not violently, but systematically and completely. I was going to take everything he loved, his hobby, his haunts, his entire gambling ecosystem, and burn it to the ground. Then I was going to rebuild it in my image, with my rules, and he was going to watch every minute of it. The plan began with research. I spent 3 weeks learning everything I could about Meadowbrook Racetrack, the dingy, quarter-horse track 40 minutes outside the city where Dad spent most of his time and money. I studied their financial records, publicly available since they received state gaming revenue, analyzed their customer demographics, researched their ownership structure and corporate partnerships. What I found was beautiful in its simplicity. Meadowbrook was dying. The track had been hemorrhaging money for years, caught between rising operating costs and declining attendance. Younger gamblers preferred online betting, and older gamblers were literally dying off. The facility was outdated, the purses were small, and the racing quality was mediocre at best. The current ownership, Group 3 local businessmen who'd bought the place 15 years earlier as a tax write-off, were actively looking for buyers. Better yet, they were desperate enough to consider creative financing options. I started by liquidating everything I owned. My car, my laptop, my jewelry, even my textbooks from the semester I'd just abandoned. It wasn't much, maybe 8-0 total, but it was seed money. Then I did something that would have horrified my former self. I took out the largest personal loan I could qualify for, using my spotless credit and employment history as collateral. The bank officer who processed my application was a middle-aged woman named Patricia Chen who seemed genuinely concerned about my financial decision-making. "This is a significant amount of debt for someone your age," she said gently. "Are you sure you've thought this through? Student loans might be a better option if you're trying to fund your education." "I'm not funding my education," I told her. "I'm funding my father's." She looked confused, but the paperwork was all in order, so she processed the loan. 48 hours later, I had 75-0 in my checking account and the beginnings of a plan that would either make me rich or destroy my credit for the next decade. I spent the next month becoming an expert in everything I'd never wanted to know about horse racing. I learned about breeding programs and training methods, about the economics of purse distribution and the politics of racing commissions. I studied successful track management strategies, analyzed profit margins for different types of betting operations, and developed what I thought was a reasonably solid business plan for turning Meadowbrook into a profitable enterprise. More importantly, I became a regular customer. Every day for 3 weeks, I drove to Meadowbrook and bet the minimum on random horses, not caring whether I won or lost. I wasn't there to gamble, I was there to observe. I watched the patterns of other bettors, noted which employees seemed competent and which seemed like deadweight, and gradually became a familiar face around the facility. Dad was there most afternoons, of course. The first time I saw him, hunched over a racing form at his usual table in the clubhouse, I felt a surge of something that might have been pity if I'd let it develop. Instead, I turned it into fuel for my anger. He'd stolen my future, and now I was going to steal his sanctuary. He noticed me eventually hard not to, since I made sure to sit where he'd have to see me. The look on his face when our eyes met was everything I'd hoped for. Confusion, shame, fear, and just a hint of the defensive anger that always came when someone confronted him with the consequences of his actions. "Sarah?" He approached my table cautiously, like I might bolt if he moved too quickly. "What are you doing here, sweetheart?" "Learning," I said simply. "Turns out there's a lot to know about this business." He sat down across from me, and I could see him struggling to find the right words, the right tone, apologetic but not defeated, regretful but not ready to admit fault. It was a familiar dance. "Listen, about your tuition money." "Don't." I cut him off with a sharpness that surprised both of us. "We're not talking about that. We're never talking about that again. But I need you to understand." "What I understand," I said, meeting his eyes with a steady gaze that made him fidget uncomfortably, "is that you had a choice between your daughter's future and a horse race, and you chose the horse race. What I understand is that you've been making that same choice, in different forms, for my entire life. What I understand is that I'm done pretending it's going to change." He opened his mouth to argue, to make excuses, to deploy whatever manipulation tactics had worked on me in the past. But something in my expression must have warned him off, because he closed it again without saying anything. "I'm not angry anymore, Dad," I continued, and it was true. The rage that had sustained me through the worst moments of the past month had crystallized into something colder and more useful. Anger is what I felt when I was still hoping you'd change. This is different. What is it then? I smiled, and I could see the way it unsettled him. Too calm, too controlled, too unlike the daughter he thought he knew. Clarity. The Meadowbrook ownership group was exactly as desperate as my research had suggested. When I approached them with an offer to buy the track, they didn't even try to hide their relief. The lead owner, a man named Robert Steinberg who'd made his money in commercial real estate, actually laughed when I presented my financing proposal. "You want to buy a racetrack with a bank loan and a business plan you wrote yourself?" he asked, not unkindly. "Honey, do you have any idea how much money this place loses every year?" "About 200, I said, pulling out my analysis. "But that's because you're running it like it's 1,987. Your marketing is non-existent, your customer experience is terrible, and you're not taking advantage of any modern revenue streams. People don't just want to bet on horses anymore, they want an experience. Entertainment, a reason to bring their friends and make a day of it." I had prepared for this meeting like I was defending a master's thesis. I knew their numbers better than they did, had identified every inefficiency and missed opportunity, and had developed detailed plans for everything from social media marketing to corporate event hosting. By the time I finished my presentation, Steinberg was looking at me with something approaching respect. "This is actually not terrible," he admitted, "but you're asking us to finance most of the purchase price ourselves. Why would we do that instead of just implementing these changes ourselves?" "Because you don't want to," I said simply. "You bought this place as a tax write-off 15 years ago, and you've been bleeding money ever since. You want out, and I want in. I'm offering you a way to recover most of your investment while transferring all the risk and liability to someone young and stupid enough to think they can make it work." Robert laughed again, but this time it was appreciative rather than dismissive. "You know, I like you. You remind me of myself at your age, confident to the point of delusion, but smart enough to make it work." He looked around the table at his partners. "What do you think, gentlemen? Should we let this kid try to save our white elephant?" The negotiation took 6 weeks and involved more lawyers than I thought existed in our entire state. The final terms were actually more generous than I dared to hope. I would purchase Meadowbrook Racetrack for $1.2 million with $300,000 down and the rest financed through a combination of seller financing and revenue-sharing agreements. If I could make the track profitable within 3 years, I'd own it outright. If I failed, they'd take it back and keep the down payment. "You realize you're betting your entire future on a horse track," Mom said when I explained the deal to her. We were sitting in her kitchen, the same one where I'd overheard so many arguments about Dad's gambling, and the irony wasn't lost on either of us. "Yeah," I said, "but this time I'm the house." The day I took ownership of Meadowbrook Racetrack was unseasonably warm for March, with the kind of brilliant sunshine that made everything look more possible than it probably was. I spent the morning in the track offices signing what felt like several hundred documents, then walked out onto the grounds that were, now, impossibly, mine. It was exactly as shabby as I'd expected. The grandstand needed paint, the betting windows needed updating, and the entire facility needed the kind of deep cleaning that comes from years of deferred maintenance. But underneath the surface neglect, I could see the bones of something beautiful. A half-mile oval with good sightlines, a clubhouse with genuine character, and enough space to build something special. More importantly, I could see the faces of the regular customers, including my father, as word spread that Meadowbrook had new management, the looks of confusion and curiosity I'd expected. The look of dawning horror on Dad's face when he realized who the new owner was, that was everything I'd hoped for and more. He cornered me in the parking lot that evening as I was leaving. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, and there was the anger I'd been waiting for, the indignation that always came when someone threatened his version of reality. "I'm running a business," I said calmly, unlocking my car with deliberate slowness. "Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Walsh?" The formality hit him like a slap. "Mr. Walsh? Sarah, I'm your father." "My father gambled away my college tuition," I replied, opening my car door. "You're just another customer now." "You can't be serious about this. You're 21 years old. You don't know anything about running a racetrack." "I know more than you think," I said. "For instance, I know that you've lost approximately 73-0 at this track over the past 3 years. I know that you have credit arrangements with 2 different bookmakers that you're currently behind on, and I know that as of tomorrow, those credit arrangements are void. His face went pale. You can't do that. I have relationships here, agreements. You had agreements with the previous management, I corrected. I'm implementing new policies regarding credit and customer accounts. Everything cash up front, no exceptions. Sarah, please. The anger crumbled into desperate pleading. This place is all I have. Don't take this away from me. For just a moment, looking at my father's face in the parking lot shadows, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy. He looked smaller than I remembered, older and more fragile, and there was genuine pain in his eyes. Then I remembered sitting in my dorm room at 3:47 a.m., staring at my phone as my future disintegrated. You took my education away from me, I said quietly. Consider this a learning experience. The first few months of owning Meadowbrook were simultaneously the most exhausting and exhilarating period of my life. I worked 16-hour days, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. I mucked stalls, updated betting equipment, balanced books, and spent countless hours on the phone with vendors, trainers, and racing officials. But slowly, incrementally, the changes I'd planned began to take effect. I started by focusing on the customer experience. The entire facility got a deep clean and fresh paint. I updated the sound system, installed new LED displays for race results, and created comfortable seating areas with charging stations and decent food options. I hired a social media manager, a recent marketing graduate named Jessica Chen, Patricia's daughter as it turned out, and we began promoting Meadowbrook as a fun, social destination rather than just a place to gamble. The results were immediate and encouraging. Attendance increased by 30% in the first 2 months, and our average customer spend went up even more dramatically. People were staying longer, bringing friends, and treating race day as an event rather than just a transaction. More importantly, at least from my perspective, I was systematically dismantling the ecosystem that had enabled my father's addiction. The old credit system was gone. The bookmakers who'd operated semi-officially out of the clubhouse were banned from the premises. The culture of secrecy and financial irresponsibility that had thrived under the previous management was replaced with transparency and strict policies. Dad tested those policies repeatedly in the first few weeks. He'd arrive at the track expecting to bet on credit like he always had, only to be politely but firmly turned away by staff who'd been thoroughly trained in the new procedures. He tried calling in favors with longtime employees, attempted to negotiate special arrangements with my managers, and even showed up at my office demanding to speak with whoever's really in charge here. Each time, he was met with the same response: cash up front, no exceptions, no special treatment for anyone. You're destroying this place, he told me during one of these confrontations. These people have been coming here for years. They have relationships, trust, history. You can't just change everything overnight. Actually, I can, I said, not looking up from the revenue reports I was reviewing. I own it. This isn't business, Sarah. This is personal. You're punishing me. No, I said, finally meeting his eyes. I'm protecting other people from becoming me. The truth was, though, that it absolutely was personal. Every policy change, every modernization, every improvement I made to Meadowbrook was designed not just to make the track profitable, but to make it impossible for people like my father to operate the way they always had. I was building a business model that simply couldn't sustain gambling addicts, and I was doing it with malicious precision. But something interesting happened as the months went by. I discovered that I actually loved the work itself. Running a racetrack was endlessly complex and challenging, requiring knowledge of everything from horse physiology to municipal licensing laws. I loved the puzzle of optimizing race schedules, the satisfaction of seeing customer satisfaction scores improve, and the rush of making decisions that affected dozens of employees and hundreds of customers. I was good at it too. Better than I'd expected, better than the previous owners had been, and certainly better than anyone had predicted when I'd first announced my crazy plan. By the end of my first year, Meadowbrook was not only profitable but expanding, adding new events and services that the old management never would have considered. That success attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Marcus Rivera showed up on a Thursday afternoon in late October, introduced himself as a representative of Churchill Downs Incorporated, and asked if we could talk about partnership opportunities. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 30, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from growing up in money, and he was very clearly impressed by what I'd accomplished with Meadowbrook. "We've been watching your numbers," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. 60% revenue increase in 8 months, customer satisfaction through the roof, and you've managed to clean up a reputation that's been problematic for years. That's not beginner's luck, that's talent. I'd heard of Churchill Downs, of course. They owned Kentucky Derby, managed tracks across the country, and represented exactly the kind of corporate success I'd been dreaming about since I'd first decided to buy Meadowbrook. Having them notice my work felt like validation on a scale I hadn't dared to hope for. "What kind of partnership are you thinking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice professionally neutral. "We're expanding our regional operations," Marcus explained, "looking for smaller tracks with good management and growth potential to bring into our network. Shared marketing, coordinated racing schedules, access to our breeding and training programs, that kind of thing. But we're selective about who we work with." The conversation lasted 2 hours and covered everything from my long-term business plan to my thoughts on the future of horse racing as an industry. Marcus asked smart questions, offered useful insights, and by the end of our meeting, I felt like I'd found someone who actually understood what I was trying to build. "I'd like to keep talking about this," he said as he prepared to leave. "Would you be interested in coming to Louisville next month? We're hosting a conference for track managers, and I think you'd find it valuable. Plus, it would give you a chance to see our operation firsthand." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. "Great, I'll send you the details." He paused at my office door. "Can I ask you something? This is a pretty unusual career path for someone your age. What made you decide to buy a racetrack?" I considered several different answers: the business opportunity, the challenge, the potential for profit. All of them were true, but none of them captured the whole story. "My father is a gambling addict," I said finally. "He spent my entire childhood choosing his addiction over his family, and the final straw was when he gambled away my college tuition. I bought this place partly to prove I could succeed where he'd failed, and partly to make sure other people's children don't go through what I went through." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's actually brilliant. You turned your personal trauma into a business model that specifically addresses the problem that created the trauma in the first place." "Something like that." "Well, it's working. We'll be in touch." After he left, I sat in my office looking out at the track where afternoon training was winding down. Horses and riders moved in lazy circles around the oval, and the late afternoon sun cast everything in gold. For the first time since I'd started this crazy venture, I allowed myself to really believe that I was going to succeed. More than that, I was going to succeed spectacularly. The Louisville conference was a revelation. For 3 days, I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, track owners and managers who understood the particular challenges of running a racing operation, who shared strategies for everything from maximizing concession revenue to managing relationships with racing commissions. But more than the professional development, the conference gave me perspective on how far I'd come. A year earlier, I'd been a college dropout whose father had stolen her tuition money. Now, I was being courted by one of the most successful companies in the industry, invited to speak on panels about customer experience and modernization strategies. Marcus introduced me to key people in the Churchill Downs organization, including several regional managers who expressed genuine interest in working more closely with Meadowbrook. By the end of the conference, we had the framework for a partnership agreement that would give me access to their marketing resources and racing calendar coordination while allowing me to maintain operational independence. "You realize what this means, don't you?" Marcus said over dinner on our last night in Louisville. "If this partnership works out the way we think it will, you're looking at a significant expansion opportunity. Maybe multiple tracks, maybe even a role in our corporate development program." The possibility was intoxicating. I'd started this journey wanting to punish my father and reclaim my independence. The idea that it might actually lead to a genuine career, possibly even a fortune, was beyond anything I'd dared to imagine. "There's one thing I need to know," I said. "How do you handle problem gambling? I mean, what are Churchill Downs' policies regarding customers who clearly have addiction issues?" Marcus looked surprised by the question. "We have responsible gambling protocols, of course. Training for staff to recognize signs of problem gambling, resources for customers who want help, that kind of thing. Why?" I told him about my father, about the systematic way I'd eliminated the informal credit systems and gambling culture that had enabled his addiction. I explained my theory that racing could be profitable and entertaining without preying on people who couldn't control their betting behavior. "That's actually really smart," Marcus said when I finished, "and it's good business too. Problem gamblers might spend a lot in the short term, but they're not sustainable customers. They burn out, they cause problems, and they create liability issues. Building a customer base of people who can afford their entertainment spending and aren't betting money they need for rent, that's much more stable long term." Exactly. Have you considered writing about this? I mean, formally? There's a lot of interest in the industry about responsible gambling practices, and you've actually implemented solutions rather than just talking about them. The idea hadn't occurred to me, but it was intriguing. You think people would be interested? I think you could probably get invited to speak at every racing conference in the country, Marcus said, and I think Churchill Downs would be very interested in working with someone who's proven they can run a profitable track while also addressing social responsibility concerns. That night, lying in my hotel room overlooking the Ohio River, I started drafting an article about implementing responsible gambling practices at small racing tracks. What began as a simple case study of my changes at Meadowbrook became a comprehensive analysis of how racing could adapt to changing social attitudes about gambling while still maintaining profitability. I submitted the article to the Racing Industry Weekly when I got home, mostly on a whim. They published it 3 weeks later as their cover story, and suddenly I was fielding calls from track managers across the country who wanted to know more about my approach. More importantly, at least from my perspective, the article caught my father's attention. He showed up at my office on a Tuesday morning in November, clutching a printed copy of the Racing Industry Weekly article and looking like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. I looked up from my computer, where I'd been reviewing applications for our new customer loyalty program. "Do we? I'm pretty busy, Mr. Walsh." "Stop calling me that," he snapped. "I'm your father." "My father wouldn't have gambled away my college tuition," I replied calmly. "My father would have put his daughter's education ahead of his own entertainment. You're just a customer who's been banned from credit betting." He threw the magazine on my desk. "I read your article." "Congratulations. Did you learn anything?" "You wrote about me." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "You wrote about our family's private business for the whole industry to read." "I wrote about implementing responsible gambling practices," I corrected. "I used anonymized examples to illustrate the problems that these practices are designed to address. If you recognized yourself in those examples, maybe that should tell you something." "You made me sound like some kind of monster." "Did I?" I picked up the magazine and flipped to the relevant section. Customer A had been operating on informal credit arrangements for several years, regularly betting amounts that exceeded his stated income and frequently unable to make payments when due. When credit betting was eliminated, Customer A initially expressed anger and frustration, but ultimately began betting only what he could afford to lose in cash, resulting in a significant reduction in his overall losses. I looked back at him. "Where exactly did I call you a monster?" "You know what you did," he said, but some of the anger had gone out of his voice. "You wrote about this like it was some kind of business problem to be solved, not like it was your family." "It was a business problem," I said. "Your gambling addiction was destroying our family's financial stability, my educational opportunities, and Mom's emotional well-being. Those are problems, and now I'm in a position to implement solutions that prevent other families from going through the same thing. So this whole thing, buying the track, changing all the policies, writing articles about it, this is all about punishing me?" I leaned back in my chair and looked at my father. Really looked at him for the first time in months. He'd lost weight, and there were new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He looked older, more fragile, but also somehow cleaner, like he'd been forced to wash off a layer of grime that had been accumulating for years. "Initially, yes," I said honestly. "I bought this place because I was angry at you and I wanted to hurt you the way you'd hurt me. I wanted to take away the thing that was most important to you and make you watch while I succeeded where you'd failed." He flinched as if I'd hit him. "But something interesting happened," I continued. "I discovered that I'm actually good at this. Not just good at hurting you, but good at running a business, good at solving problems, good at creating something valuable. And I realized that what I'd built here was bigger than just revenge." So what is it now? Now, it's a successful business that happens to prevent other families from going through what we went through, I said. The fact that it also makes your gambling problem unsustainable here is just a bonus. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the magazine on my desk. You know I've been going to meetings, right? GA meetings. Haven't placed a bet in 3 months. I did know that, actually. Meadowbrook wasn't the only track in the area, and I'd heard through various industry contacts that Dad had been spotted at other facilities. But the reports suggested he was betting smaller amounts, less frequently, and always with cash. That's good, I said, and meant it. How's that going? Hard, he admitted. Really hard. But the thing is, when you took away my credit here, when you made it impossible for me to bet money I didn't have, it forced me to confront how bad things had gotten. I couldn't pretend anymore that I was just a recreational gambler who got unlucky sometimes. That was the point. I know. He met my eyes for the first time since he'd entered my office. And I need you to know that I understand what I did to you, what I took from you. Your education, your trust, your childhood, I threw all of that away for the same rush I could have gotten from a $5 scratch-off ticket. Dad? Let me finish, he said. I read your article and I saw how you wrote about responsible gambling practices, about protecting vulnerable customers from their own worst impulses. And I realized that's what you were trying to do for me too. You weren't just punishing me, you were saving me from myself. I felt something shifting in my chest, some long-held knot of anger beginning to loosen. I was punishing you, I said quietly. But if it helped in other ways, I'm glad. It did help, but more than that, it made me proud. Proud? My daughter owns a racetrack, he said, and for the first time in months, he smiled. My daughter turned her anger at me into a business plan, executed that plan flawlessly, and is now being courted by Churchill Downs. My daughter wrote an article that's being discussed at racetracks across the country. My daughter took the worst thing I ever did to her and turned it into something extraordinary. Dad? I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said quickly. I know I don't deserve that, and I know you probably can't give it to me anyway. But I needed you to know that I see what you've accomplished here, and I understand that you accomplished it despite me, not because of me. We sat in silence for a while, looking at each other across the desk that had become a symbol of everything that had changed between us. He was right that I couldn't forgive him, not yet, maybe not ever. But for the first time since that phone call at 3:47 a.m., I could see him clearly as something other than the enemy. There's one more thing, he said as he stood to leave. I want to make a formal request to close my customer account here permanently. You haven't had a customer account here for months, I pointed out. I know, but I want it on record. I want you to add me to whatever banned customer list you maintain. Make it official that I can never bet here again, even if I wanted to. Why? Because sooner or later I'm going to have a bad day, and when that happens, I want there to be obstacles between me and my worst impulses. I want my daughter's racetrack to be one of those obstacles. I pulled up the customer management system on my computer and created a new entry, Martin Walsh, permanently banned, gambling addiction self-exclusion. When I hit save, something that had been tense in my shoulders for over a year finally relaxed. Done, I said. Thank you. He paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think your mother is planning to divorce me. Are you surprised? No, he said sadly. But I thought you should know. She's been talking about moving to Phoenix to be closer to her sister, starting over somewhere where nobody knows about my problems. What will you do? I don't know yet. Find an apartment, I guess. Keep going to meetings. Try to figure out how to be a person instead of just an addiction with legs. After he left, I sat alone in my office for a long time, thinking about the strange trajectory that had brought me here. 18 months ago, I'd been a college student with a careful plan for my future. Now I was a successful businesswoman with a partnership offer from one of the most prestigious companies in my industry, and my father was a broken man starting over from scratch. I'd gotten everything I'd wanted from my revenge plan and more. So why did it feel like something was missing? The answer came to me 3 weeks later, during the Churchill Downs winter conference call where we finalized our partnership agreement. Marcus had just finished explaining the marketing support we'd receive in the coming year when he casually mentioned that they were looking for someone to head up their new responsible gaming initiative. It's a corporate-level position, he explained. Someone who would work with all our tracks to implement best practices for problem gambling prevention, develop training programs for staff, maybe even do some public speaking about industry responsibility. The salary would be substantial. How substantial? I asked, though I was already calculating whether I could afford to leave Meadowbrook in my manager's hands for extended periods. Low six figures to start, plus bonuses tied to program implementation success, and it would be based in Louisville but with significant travel to tracks across the country. That's a generous offer, I said carefully, but I'm not sure I'm ready to give up operational control of Meadowbrook. You wouldn't have to, Marcus said. This would be more like a consulting arrangement. You'd keep ownership of your track, but you'd also help us implement similar responsible gaming practices across our network. Think of it as scaling up what you've already proven works. The possibility was intoxicating. Everything I'd learned from turning my personal trauma into a business solution could be applied on a national scale. I could help create policies that would protect thousands of families from going through what mine had experienced. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course, but Sarah, you should know that this offer isn't just about your business success at Meadowbrook. We've had multiple track managers contact us asking about your responsible gaming protocols after reading your article. There's genuine demand in the industry for this kind of expertise. After the call, I drove out to the track and walked the empty grandstand, thinking about everything that had brought me to this moment. The sun was setting behind the clubhouse, painting everything in warm gold, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely peaceful. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, my social media manager. Attendance projections for next season look amazing. You've really built something special here. She was right. I had built something special, something that was profitable and ethical and sustainable. More than that, I'd proven that success didn't have to come at the expense of other people's well-being. But the Churchill Downs offer represented something even more significant. The chance to help other people avoid the kind of pain my family had experienced, and to do it on a scale that could actually make a difference. I was still standing in the grandstand, watching the last light fade from the sky, when I made my decision. The announcement that I was joining Churchill Downs as Director of Responsible Gaming Initiatives made the front page of Racing Industry Weekly and was picked up by several mainstream business publications. The coverage focused on my rapid rise from college dropout to racing executive and the innovative approaches I developed for addressing problem gambling. What the articles didn't mention was that I'd structured the arrangement to keep Meadowbrook as my primary laboratory for testing new policies and programs. I'd hired an experienced track manager to handle day-to-day operations, but I maintained ownership and creative control over everything related to customer policies and business development. In practical terms, it meant I got to keep my racetrack while also working to transform an entire industry. It was exactly the kind of outcome that my 21-year-old self never would have dared to imagine when she first walked into that bank to apply for a loan to buy a failing horse track. The first national conference where I spoke as a Churchill Downs executive was in Tampa in March, almost exactly 2 years after Dad had gambled away my tuition money. I'd been nervous about the presentation, talking to a room full of seasoned industry professionals about policies they might see as threatening to their bottom lines, but the response was overwhelmingly positive. This isn't about eliminating gambling, I explained to an audience of track owners and managers. It's about creating sustainable gambling. When customers bet money they can afford to lose, they keep coming back. When they bet money they can't afford to lose, they either burn out quickly or create problems that cost you more than their betting was worth in the first place. After the presentation, I was approached by dozens of people who wanted to implement similar programs at their own facilities. More importantly, I was approached by state gaming regulators who wanted to discuss making some of these practices mandatory across their jurisdictions. You're not just changing how the industry operates. One regulator told me, you're changing how the public perceives the industry. That's worth more than any short-term revenue hit from eliminating problem gambling. That evening, I called Mom from my hotel room to tell her about the conference response. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," she said, and I could hear genuine happiness in her voice for the first time in years. "You've taken something terrible and turned it into something that's going to help so many people." "How are things in Phoenix?" I asked. She'd moved there 6 months earlier, finally following through on her threat to leave Dad and start over somewhere new. "Good," she said. "Really good. I got promoted to shift supervisor at the restaurant, and I'm taking community college classes in accounting." It turns out I'm pretty good with numbers when I'm not constantly worried about whether there'll be any money left in the account when I try to pay bills. And Dad? He calls sometimes. He's been clean for 8 months now, according to him. Got a job doing construction work for his old crew, found a little apartment near his GA meetings. He asks about you a lot. What do you tell him? That you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, she said. That you took the worst thing he ever did to you and built something beautiful out of it. After we hung up, I sat on my hotel room balcony looking out at Tampa Bay and thinking about the strange mathematics of revenge. I'd set out to destroy my father and ended up transforming my own life beyond recognition. I'd wanted to hurt him and ended up creating something that could help thousands of other families avoid the pain mine had experienced. It wasn't forgiveness. I still wasn't ready for that. Might never be ready for that. But it was something better than forgiveness. It was purpose. The call came on a Thursday morning in May, almost exactly 3 years after Dad had first gambled away my tuition money. I was in my Churchill Downs office in Louisville, reviewing proposals for a new responsible gaming training program, when my assistant buzzed to say that a Martin Walsh was on the line. I almost didn't take the call. We'd spoken only a handful of times since our conversation in my Meadowbrook office, and those conversations had been brief and carefully neutral. But something in my assistant's voice suggested this was different. "Dad?" I said when I picked up the phone. "Sarah." His voice was shaky, uncertain. "I hope it's okay that I called you at work. I wasn't sure if I should use your personal number." "It's fine. What's going on?" "I wanted to tell you something, and I wanted to tell you properly, not in a text or through your mother." He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. "I got my 2-year chip yesterday, 2 years clean." I felt something shift in my chest, a loosening of tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying. "That's really good, Dad. I'm proud of you." "There's something else," he said. "I've been working with a sponsor, doing the 12 steps, and one of them is about making amends to people you've harmed. I know I can't undo what I did to you, and I know you probably don't want to hear apologies from me, but I needed to say it officially." "Okay." "I stole your future, Sarah. I took the money that was supposed to give you opportunities and threw it away on a horse race because I was more concerned with feeding my addiction than protecting my daughter. I robbed you of your education, your trust in me, and probably years of your childhood worrying about whether our family was going to be okay financially." I was quiet for a moment, listening to him breathe on the other end of the line. "But," he continued, "I also need to tell you that what you did buying that track, changing those policies, building what you've built it saved my life. Not just because it forced me to confront my addiction, but because it showed me that the damage I'd caused wasn't permanent. You took what I destroyed and built something even better." "Dad?" "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said quickly. "I know I don't deserve that. But I needed you to know that I see what you've accomplished, and I understand that you accomplished it not because of me, but despite me. And I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Not sorry I got caught, not sorry about the consequences, but genuinely sorry that I hurt you." I stared out my office window at the Kentucky countryside, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The 18-year-old girl who'd carefully planned her escape from her father's chaos. The 21-year-old who'd turned her rage into a business plan. The 24-year-old who'd built a career out of preventing other families from experiencing what hers had gone through. "I accept your apology," I said finally. "And for what it's worth, I'm grateful that something good came out of everything that happened." "More than something good," he said. "You've built something extraordinary. I saw the article in Business Week about your promotion to vice president. I know I don't have any right to feel proud, but I can't help it." The promotion had been announced the week before VP of Responsible Gaming and Customer Experience, with oversight of programs across Churchill Downs' entire network of tracks. It represented everything I'd worked towards since that first night when I decided to turn my anger into action. "Thank you," I said. "That means something, coming from you." "There's one more thing," he said. "I wanted you to know that I'm going to be okay. I mean, I'm going to keep working on staying clean, but I'm also building a life that doesn't revolve around gambling or recovery. I'm seeing a woman from my group, and we're talking about getting a little place together. Nothing fancy, but somewhere stable." "I'm glad," I said, and meant it. "I know things between us will probably never be the same," he said, "but I wanted you to know that I'm grateful every day that you turned out to be stronger than I was. You saved yourself when I couldn't, and then you saved me too, even though I didn't deserve it." After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me here. I'd started with a simple goal: destroy my father's world and build something better in its place. I'd accomplished that goal more completely than I'd ever imagined possible. But somehow, in the process of destroying his world, I'd also managed to help him build a new one, and in seeking revenge against his selfishness, I'd discovered my own capacity for forgiveness. It wasn't the ending I'd planned, but it was better than anything I could have planned. 3 years ago, my father bet my tuition on horses. Today, I run the responsible gaming programs for one of the largest racing companies in America, own a profitable racetrack, and have helped implement policies that protect thousands of families from experiencing what mine went through. Sometimes the house wins in ways you never expect.